Well, my wife's a Canadian, they have great charm, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And actually, while you were talking, it put me in mind of the security of sort of knowing your history. And I know genealogy, etc., is one of the great means that people find out their past, and it's very, very popular, whether it's on TV or on the internet. And I have the security through my Spencer side of sort of knowing what everyone was doing for a very, very long time and how they've left their mark. And in fact, I know that this month, 950 years ago, the first Spencer arrived in England with William the Conqueror to, I'm afraid, kill English people. But we eventually became very civilized and turned to rearing sheep. And we became the sort of great landowners, I suppose, of central England. And I tell you this background because it meant that my family, for a very long time, have been in the incredibly privileged position of being able to choose how they wanted to live, where they wanted to live, and how they wanted to surround themselves. And I know there's a lot of people here from different backgrounds, but I think what I really want to stress today is how this collection has evolved authentically over many generations. Harvey mentioned we've been living in Althorp since 1508, in fact, and I'm the 19th generation of Spencers to live there. And the very first one who lived there was a man called John Spencer, and he left as a codicil, a little condition in his will, that whoever lives at Althorp must use it as a place of entertainment. And I want to stress that this is still a house that's enjoyed and used by the family it was built for. And I really can't think of many of the great houses of England where that's still the case. Most of them have been given over to charity or to heritage bodies, but this is one of the authentic living family houses from many hundreds of years ago, and it's a great privilege, particularly as a historian, to live in such a place. And I think when I took over 25 years ago, I was slightly overawed. It seemed an impossibly large place to be looking after, and quite a large responsibility as well. But what I really cracked as the secret to this place was that it had to be a home. And I think that's what every single one of my predecessors had managed to do. And the furniture you see, so beautifully arranged, I must say, throughout all these rooms, are the product of many centuries of really sort of quality control. You'll all know from your own experience that when somebody passes on in a family, the family coming on moves into the house and thinks, well, I'll live with that, and I'm not sure that's right, and I'll give that away, or whatever. So every piece you see in this collection has gone through a generational check as to whether it's good enough or pretty enough or handsome enough to be lived with. And I think that's why every piece you see has a sort of authentic classical quality to it. And I have to say I also have a house in Los Angeles, a much more contemporary looking setup than this, but I still have pieces from Althorp in that. I think it's important to remember you don't have to be a modernist or a classicist in terms of the way you do up a house. I go back to the point that quality is the key, and if you have something that in its essence is pure and beautiful, it will work, whether it's from the 18th century or from 2008. It doesn't matter. They should blend, and they should actually complement each other. And I think I've been all over this country looking at how this furniture's percolated out into different states. And it is amazing when you see pieces blending with really things you wouldn't put together necessarily. And also, I think you have to remember that this is a collection that's evolved over 500 years. And actually, the pieces that people bought in 1700 had to go with pieces that had been made in 1500. And I think the other thing I wanted to really leave you with today is that pretty much every piece in this collection, the original, wasn't actually bought as such. It was commissioned. And so it was made to order by a member of my family who thought, that is precisely what I want in my house. And I know it's difficult because you're all in very different sectors of here, but once this talk is mercifully for you over, I want you to just look out for three pieces. One, just behind this wall, is the Washington chest, which is one of my favorites. It's an exact copy of a chest. I suppose it was probably originally a blanket chest that belonged to George Washington's forebears before they left for America. And actually, if you open this, you'll see a reproduction on the top of the chest of a sworn affidavit from a priest who lived in the village of Great Brinkton, which is 1 mile from Althorp, swearing that that had belonged to the Washington family in the 17th century. And it's amazing, the connection between the Washingtons and the Spencers. They were actually, strange to say, but they were poor relations actually, because one of them had married a distant Spencer child. And they had made the mistake, when Henry VIII had decided to get rid of Catholicism, so he could enrich himself really, and he confiscated all these monasteries, one of the pieces of church land that he sold off was to the Washingtons, and it was considered incredibly bad luck to take on this sort of land, because of course it was sacred. And the Washingtons duly fell on hard times, and then they ended up in a cottage, which we still call Washington Cottage, up at the top of the hill from Althorp. And we have the family records where the Washington children came to work in Althorp, helping as nannies to the Spencer children, or helping in the kitchens or whatever. So it's lovely to have these connections with American history, but also there's another piece which you'll see, in fact, in that picture there for those who are in this room, but it's a hall chair. You'll see it's an incredibly ornate and beautiful piece, which has been, I know, a very popular part of this collection. And it really is testimony, I love the fact this has all evolved naturally, testimony to how appalling the British climate is. Because you would have hall seats for people arriving on horseback to come and see the family. And that meant you really didn't want your upholstery ruined. But you also didn't want to look cheap in any way. So you had the best craftsmen you could lay your hands on would come and do scrolled woodwork on it and put the family coat of arms to make it all look that bit more special, that you were a welcome guest and not just a dripping wet one. And I could go into any room here, and it is quite bizarre, because if you look at the secretary, which is the open chest in that room opposite me, of course I should have thought, well, I'm going to see that when I come here, but I was in the King William bedroom in Althorp, where that is, literally 2 days ago, just checking something in a drawer there. And so it's quite bizarre for me to come quite a few thousand miles and see exactly the same thing here. And people do say to me, is this collection a copy of, or is it inspired by the pieces at Althorp? And to be honest, I think about 60% of it is exactly the same. And then other things have been slightly modified purely because our tastes have changed. So, for instance, this sofa to my left is very, very familiar to me as a design. But you've got to think who it was made for in the 1700s. And it was for ladies dressed up to the nines in these huge dresses who were not looking for comfort. They were looking for somewhere to perch and to be able to launch themselves with ease when they were asked to dance. But for us, it's to sit around for a very long time talking too much or watch TV or whatever. And so we have adapted that to a more sumptuous filling so that you actually do get some comfort out of it. But I think the key to the whole collection really is the evolution from, if you look at this 500 years my family have been there, when they settled at Althorp in 1508, it was at the end of a sort of turbulent and bloody time, the Wars of the Roses, which were really the backdrop for Game of Thrones. It was a pretty vicious time in England. Through to today, where everything is very civilized. And you see the interior of the house morphing and changing with the feel of the times, I suppose. So what started as a house with a moat and fortifications then got modified in the 1600s and was given beautiful formal gardens next to the house. And the interior changed too. These rather solid, large rooms from the Tudor era became much more refined, and the finest craftsmen from Europe were brought in to gild, to make plasterwork in the ceiling that looked beautiful, and to make it a backdrop for the art they were buying from around Europe. That we have a lot of Italian and Dutch and French art, a lot of British art, of course. But gradually this collection managed to increase, and in particular, the furniture became more and more sophisticated and delicate. People wanted to show off their wealth, and they wanted to dazzle their guests. And all the gilded furniture, I think we have to remember it was made for a totally different era where a lot of entertaining was done at night time. So candlelight sparkling on the gilding was really a very dramatic thing. And in fact, gilding in those days was much, much more intense than we're used to now. We're used to seeing things looking a little bit faded and jaded, but they wanted things to sparkle, because you've got to remember that candlelight. And then again, it was for people to enjoy. And I think there must have been an enormous amount of pleasure in bringing in Chippendale, for instance, and saying, well, I want some tables. And what a wonderful thing. You're bringing in the greatest craftsman of his era to come and make something that your family will enjoy for generations. So, as I get to the end of what is rather a long speech, and I'm very happy to talk to any of you individually after this, but I wanted to say that, it's been an incredibly happy relationship with Theodore Alexander.